Hi, I'm Kiri Mews and I'm here at DDDPerth to talk to you about things I learned from my mentors. So first up, I want to call out and say thank you to the amazing sponsors of DDDPerth that have made the event today possible. And next up, I just want to go through why I'm here to talk to you about mentors. Mentors are people that have inspired me, and honestly, without their influence, I wouldn't have gotten up here and decided to try and give a talk today. They're people that help you work smart and not hard, set better goals for yourself, and actually help you achieve those goals faster. So today, why are you here and what can you actually do with this information about what my mentors told me? Well, I think I've got a lot of helpful advice that you can use if you're just starting on your career in tech or going through a career transformation like I've just done. Or if you are already a professional working in technology, it's information that might be a bit of a reminder that you can apply for yourself again. Lastly, what I really want you to take from this talk is information that you can share with other people, people that you come across that are starting on their journey, and think about the things that are actually really helpful for a beginner. So for me, where did I start? Well, my journey starts in January of last year. I stepped into a role, or was offered a role, which was a temporary position without much security, working closer in IT. I'd come from working in the business side, getting user adoption, providing some training, and I actually started to work on that system that I've been working with. So suddenly that made me being the least experienced person, and I had a lot to learn. First, I needed to learn how to ask for help and work out what I wanted to do study-wise. First step was playing with a little bit of a TAFE course where I looked at doing some understanding databases. And then I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the SheCodes Plus program, which was a 6-month intensive course on coding, which included some things that were helpful for me in that current job and just some really useful understanding and, most importantly, access to some mentors. So where am I now? So at this point, 18 months later, July 2021, I am feeling confident in having technical conversations. I get to solve technical problems, which I love doing. I have learnt some programming and how to code, and I feel ready that I can start approaching new topics. The SheCodes Plus 2020 Alumni member, which feels amazing, and I've just recently gotten 6 Microsoft certifications to back up the other study that I've done. And most importantly, I've started an amazing job and now feel so much more secure in my career. For now, we just want to go through and think about what a mentor is, because once I started bringing this all together, I realised it means something different to a lot of people. The key thing that I find is a mentor is someone who can help you with your professional or personal development, someone that you trust and someone that you respect. But most importantly, they need to be open to having a conversation with you and talking to you. So for me, what makes someone a mentor? For me, it's not around a formal arrangement where they talk to me once a month and guide me through a process. It's something that I drive with people informally and access them based on their area of expertise. They don't need to be just a role model where they have multiple things that I want to admire. They can have some areas that aren't the best, but they're really people, humans, and many of them. And main thing is, with all of these connections that I've made, is me as the mentee is overall responsible for what I do, and I'm setting the goals. So, just getting you ready into these amazing things that I'm saying they've told me, I just want to go through some of the basics that I needed to be told as a beginner that you may not realise are things that need to be taught to people. So, the first one is timeboxing, which is something that needed to be sort of explained to me, even though the name can give it away. And this is just about defining a period of time to the problem that you're tackling. This can be used to tackle something you're not looking forward to doing, or it could be to think about how long you want to give a technical problem and the solution that you're trying out before stopping and asking for help. So here, set your time limit. Once that's up, walk away is normally a step I need to take, grab a cup of coffee, and come back and assess your progress. When you're at this stage, this is when you start to consider if you need to ask for help and maybe also just rethink your approach. And the next thing that was key in learning and understanding is realizing that I will never know everything. No one will ever know everything. Moving into the technology space is about being comfortable in not knowing and asking questions. It's about continued learning and realizing you're constantly on that growth stage. And first thing I started to realize is even experts need to ask for help sometimes. On starting to learn, an important concept I needed to realize was about foundations first. There's an abundance of things that you can learn, and it's easy to try and chop and change, test things out. So using an example of code and programming, I want to talk to you about, say, learning Python. So you pick the one thing and you start. The main thing is realistically to define what it is that you're trying to do with what you're trying to learn. So with Python, it could be find out how to analyze some certain data or build something. From here, it's really around getting that item done and sticking with it. So if indentation errors are driving you absolutely crazy and you've heard that Python and indentation are a bit of a thing that you're not going to encounter with the next language, you could be trying to jump ship. What I'm saying is you need to really stick it out and finish that goal, because these are things that you're going to be able to transfer. You don't need to become an expert, but these foundation principles that you've learnt from Python will carry across when you try and learn some more programming. And the key thing is here, when you look back, I know that you're probably going to think those indentation errors were actually useful. It was an error message that actually told me what the problem was. What was I thinking? From here, I want to talk about writing some things down. So it's something you're told probably no matter what industry you're in, but is really important with technology. Documentation is a big part of technical roles that doesn't often get spoken about. For writing notes down for yourself, I encourage you to store these in something you can access anywhere or online. OneNote, Notion, if you've not heard of, is another online tool, and even keeping things in GitHub can be really useful and shareable. When I need to learn something that requires more than 3 steps, I work on a checklist. I quickly realised that a few months later, I don't remember that much, and I need to go through and remind myself of the steps. And importantly, the other thing is try and write things down in a way that you can send other people when they ask the question. They'll appreciate it, and if they do the same, I'm sure they're going to return the favour when you ask them. From here, I couldn't be talking about what mentors told me without the things that they constantly reinforce, which is to put a meaningful comments in your code and make sure your commit messages say something helpful. From here, I want to cover a bit about how to document things down. And if you're in a position where you're helping somebody out, I'd really encourage you to see if you can just show them a little bit about how you store information about what they're asking about. For me, I was getting a lot of different links and a lot of different resources, and bookmarks are actually a really impractical way to store that information. I've started to use Notion to store the link and index it against what that sort of particular topic's about, and maybe use some other tags that are meaningful, and I can actually go through and sort through that when I can't remember the name of the tool I was told about a few months later. The other thing is, again, that advice I was given is to consider making it so you can actually publish these notes online somewhere. If you've had to Google something 3 or 4 different ways in order to find this information, chances are someone else is doing the same thing. And you can share that information and start to connect with other people. Lastly, this is something that was a groundbreaking idea for me, but might be obvious to other people, but I still want to call it out. It's when I was writing notes down, if I couldn't find a logical space, I would either spend hours reorganising my notes so I could put it somewhere, or not write that piece of information down. Someone showed me putting things into a tidbits section. If I need to find it later, all these online tools have a search feature anyway, but at least I've written it down and moved on with my day and the task at hand. So, rubber ducking, which experienced developers probably know all too well. It's come from the book, The Pragmatic Programmer. The idea of rubber ducking is sitting when you're trying to debug your code, describing it line by line to a duck, as if figuring out where the problem is. I have used this as well, just in general, talking out loud about technical problems that I'm trying to solve and working through what that's going to be. Now, your rubber duck doesn't need to be a piece of plastic. It can be your pet, it can be a friend, it can be your spouse. I also find that sometimes just pretending to write out a message or an email and the process of typing out the question has helped me work out what I'm trying to figure out and come closer to the solution. The step that I always try and follow after I get past this rubber duck thing is, whilst I get and start to understand the problems I need to take in English, is to write it down in pseudocode, being a mismatch of whatever language I'm trying to write it in and English. And when I start to step through and get the syntax right, I still can keep sight of the next few steps I'm trying to follow. From here, I thought it'd be a good chance to tell you, aside from rubber ducks, there's some other cool things that I learned from my mentors. The first one, which I use embarrassingly often and rave about, is my favourite keyboard shortcut I learnt last year. For Windows, it's a spacebar and full stop, and for Mac, it's Command, Control, and Space. And that just brings up an emoji keyboard. You can put this in wherever you want, but it's useful to have on hand. From there, I also thought I'd call out to something that saved me a couple of hours a few times, is Bracket Pair Colorizer, which is a VS Code extension to help you match up where your closing brackets might have gone a little bit wonky. And Undraw, which is just an image library. It comes with some standard images, what I've used in this presentation, that you can actually set the colour to. I find it really helpful to have things like this bookmarked and on hand, because whilst I'm not working full-time as a web developer, I've got some resources I can refer to when I need something in a pinch. Flaticon.com is another useful place to get images, and colours.lol is one of many colour palette pickers that are out there. It just happens to be the URL that I remember when I need something. Now, I'm going to update and have the information available of my favourite items available on GitHub, which is hellokirilee.github.io, so you can access these links easily afterwards. So, next up, I want to take you through some less common advice and really some of the super meaningful things that aren't necessarily things I hear or have been told more than once. So, the first up is helping others while you're still learning. So you may not feel like an expert, but explaining something that you've just learned is what I found the best way to really cement my understanding. I found that beginners often spot beginner problems. Going through the SheCodes program, working with other women learning how to code at the same time, I had a situation where 5 mentors had come up, scratched their head and couldn't work out what on earth was going wrong with what I was doing and why it wasn't working. I ended up going in the too hard section of the room with a couple of other girls where a few people had looked at, couldn't figure out what on earth it was. I thought mine was lost cause, tried to help the girl that was sitting over there with me, and we were able to go through steps. She was ahead of where I was, but I actually helped figure out what her problem was and got her on her way. Now, she insisted that she try and do the same for me, even though so many people had just couldn't work out what was going on. And she actually spotted what the issue was immediately, because as a beginner, it's a mistake she'd made and something she'd written down, but it was something assumed by any developer that was looking at it. The other thing is really talking to other people learning makes you realise there's so many different ways that you can tackle a problem and helps you think about other ways of thinking about technical issues. And lastly, if all else fails, you can always be their rubber duck and help them talk through the issue. Now, on learning, and something I've taken away from going through a course learning about coding was really when I start to find out about new technical item, coding language, or some other tool that I'm using, I approach it by building a project first. So not only does this help you get a portfolio of work, but it is just really a great way to learn. So I start by doing one tutorial and limiting myself to that. I then go around and ask people around that I might know to work out what a good project would be for that technology. So at the moment, I'm wanting to learn more about .NET Framework. So I've reached out to people I know that work in that space and asked what would be a good idea for a project. By talking to a mentor, she said maybe not using Blazor, and suggested I create an app to store my friends' date of births. So at the moment, I'm now working through getting requirements together for me to work through, because I actually need a bit of a framework. I get a little bit distracted and a little bit too creative otherwise. And I'm going to set myself a time frame on when I want to finish this by, again, for myself. And the idea isn't to be horrible. I'm still flexible with myself. I've just got a set goal and I'm keeping it fun. From here, I want to talk a little bit more about certifications. Certifications are what helped me bridge what I learned at work and what I learned through SheCodes and all of my self-study together to really help shape my career. So for me, validating all of that information was key, and I'll talk a bit more around Microsoft certifications because that's what I know and I've had recent experience with, but I understand this pretty much applies straight across to your AWS certs and other technology that you're going to learn. So first thing is there's online training days, particularly since 2020, more and more online training days have become available from these certification providers, and they are free a lot of the time. So can really give some tips on preparing for that particular exam during those days. And also make sure you look at the learning materials available by who's setting the exam. There's lots of pathways available, Microsoft Learn, and lots of information in the documentation. From here, when you start thinking about preparing for your exam, even if the end certificate that you're wanting to get is a little bit higher level, still start with a basic exam. Often they might be a little bit cheaper, easier to access, but the key thing is preparing for these exams, it's a bit of a strange environment. If you haven't done a multiple choice test for a long time, you kind of forget the strange nuances involved there. So take the time to start with the basic exam and make sure you're ready to go when you start to challenge yourself a little bit more. From here, I just want to talk you through a little bit about how I prepare for the exams and some of the advice that I received. So for me, I needed to get the date booked and set a time frame for when I wanted to attend the exam. If you're doing this, I encourage you to also have a look at what your cancellation window is or your rebooking window is, and maybe set yourself a reminder just before that expires too. What I then do is find where the resource is available for exam contents and work out where the exam's weighted. And for me, I dump that into something that I can edit, and I straight away, anything I think I know inside out, I delete. I don't need to think about that. And I flag yellow anything I've got no idea what they're talking about, and leave the rest there and review the weighting. And then that's where I focus on my learning on. From here, I generally, honestly, sometimes forget about my exam for a little while and repeat that exercise a couple of hours before the exam, making sure I research any of those problem areas immediately before the exam hits and hoping I retain that information. The next thing is online proctoring, which is a really useful thing that's available, but something just to be aware of. The exam conditions are a little bit strange, having someone watching you through a webcam, and there's a bit of advice they warn you about, but a few things that can easily catch you out is they generally only allow one screen, and that means you can't plug your laptop into a monitor and have your laptop on your desk. They often have a rule only allowing you to have water, even if it doesn't say that specifically. You can get called out for having a coffee on your desk. And look, it's a bit intense having someone watching you like that, and to be aware of it. I've gotten called out because my cat's walked across the room and my eyes have come off the screen for a few seconds. It's what it is. It's convenient doing it at home, but just be aware it's a pretty unusual setting, and you start to get used to it with a few more exams. Lastly, once you've nailed that exam and passed it, make sure that you stop and celebrate on LinkedIn and share that information. You can link up those certifications straight through to your LinkedIn profile so the verified cert shows up straight away and get that recognition. So on career advice, at this point I've talked about what I've been learning at work, what I've certified, and finishing off SheCodes. I need to start planning what my next steps were going to be. So for me, I had the pleasure of having an amazing boss and a great working environment, but just a little bit growth restricted in that role. So I had time on my side to start thinking about things. I started talking to people who maybe have hired but weren't hiring at that time to get a bit of information informally around interview processes, different roles that I might be suitable for, and information that maybe I'd done, and teasing out what was super impressive that I'd done and knowing what to actually put onto my CV. From here, I also kept an eye on different roles and constantly having a look at what skills would be transferable that I needed to include in my job applications and make sure I'd highlighted from previous work experience. I strongly suggest that when you start working in IT and need to interview, to ask a few questions about the interview format and just being prepared if you're going to be going in for a technical interview, and understand what sort of questions might pop up. The key thing, which is something that doesn't necessarily, definitely applies to IT, but you may not necessarily have experienced before, is that you need to understand the salaries before you get to those conversations. You normally need to actually give what sort of salary expectations you're after rather than being prompted and asked. And that's something that I was definitely not comfortable with and really needed to have researched before I found myself in that position. And I'm very lucky that someone warned me about that. So, next up, I really want to go through understanding what you want. Because I had gone through a transition and I had a variety of different experience and technical skills under my belt, I kind of didn't want exactly coding all day at a junior level. I didn't want just talking about this application. I wanted to find a way to combine the different things that I liked. And to be honest, I wasn't very good at communicating how that was going to work out. I was fortunate enough to be set up on a coffee date with someone who worked in a technical role, but not really related at all to what I did in IT, to help tease out of me how and what on earth I was talking about so I could have those conversations. And I was taken through this exercise that I did for myself, and I want to talk to you about because it's made such a big difference for me. So there's a few things to think about with any role. First off, if title, or what the actual role's called, is important to you, if you care about having an idea of what sort of salary you're expecting, and from there, think about the boss that you want to work with. And this is where this advice sort of changes a little bit. So this is, do you want a mentor at this stage in your career? Do you want a boss that just leaves you alone and lets you decide what you do? This is a personal thing. Next off is, what do you want your team to be like? For me, I wanted to be around other technical people who were constantly challenging themselves and sharing new technical discoveries. And that was what was key for me. The other thing is location. This is more and more important in a COVID world that we've gotten used to working from home. If you need to have some work from home or a distance from the office, right, have a think about that. And lastly is, what are your day-to-day duties? What does your ideal day look like to you? So for me, it was a matter of writing these things down, even though not all of these things were exactly important to me. I knew what was, and having it there. Once I knew my day-to-day boss-colleague situation, I was far more prepared to have conversations with possible employers or recruiters about what I really wanted. The next step in going through this process is keeping this just for you, but then also writing the same thing down about where you want to be in 2-5 years, what it might be for you. For me, it was 2 years, and I wrote this down again and I've kept that on hand. So all of this advice sounds amazing, tailored just to me. So I want to tell you about finding mentors. So the first step is obviously to get out and meet some people. Now, I was talking about going to events, but realistically, it's just about getting involved in something in the community. That can be online, and there's plenty of local-based online things during these times, but it's actually just getting out and getting involved. For any women in technology or entering technology in Australia, I need to shout out SheCodes Australia because they were integral in the beginning of my journey. And also technical meetups, which are a little bit scary and daunting if you're just learning that technology, but are an amazing place to find people that are excited about that technology and want to talk about it. From here, work, this can be pretty obvious, but I'm going to call it out, friends and friends of friends. Your friends probably have really good judge of people you might want to hang around with, and they may know people that are connected in that space that you want to do. Get a feel. You'd be surprised. And the last thing is, technical people are everywhere. So what I actually really want to shout out to is I had an almost life-changing conversation over the Christmas New Year period, borrowing a hammer from my neighbour. My neighbour was a lovely, chatty person, and when returning the hammer, she decided to ask what on earth it was I was building and check out my lovely IKEA dining room table. Once we got talking, she started asking a little bit about me and found out that I was working in IT and starting to think about what I wanted to do next. I then find out that Sally, now retired, had spent her career in IT and was quite involved in different community things. We sat down and she, first off, introduced me to the person who took me out for the coffee and taught me a bit about planning for my career. She also taught to me and really built my confidence around, now my SheCodes course had finished where mentors were readily available for me, how on earth I was going to keep finding people that would help me along my journey. Sally herself was leaving Perth, so I made the most of the connections and the conversations. So from here, making these connections. This is around whenever you meet someone, trying to be open, friendly, and having a bit of an elevator pitch. So knowing what it is that you do and where you want to go and what interests you, that's going to help you prepare for a lead-in and amazing conversation. This really goes for if you're going to an event and hoping to find someone who's going to give you some guidance, don't just think about what you want from them, think about how you're going to present yourself to them so they want to engage with you. From here, it's really around connecting, using socials. I want to call out, it sounds obvious, LinkedIn and Twitter as an appropriate place to follow up those conversations and those people you meet with. When it comes to actually engaging your mentors, for me, it's around having lots of people that I can ask questions. I don't use the formal mentor word with a lot of these people. And honestly, some of the advice I've already called out has come off from single conversations, but really, they did mentor me. So when I approach someone, I need to know what I'm asking and know what I'm asking for and what I'm really expecting from them. So I can make it clear that it's something they can be comfortable with. I'm not going to ask them something that's going to put them in an uncomfortable position about things that go on with their employer. It's something that is easy for them to be able to help with. I express my thanks and show gratitude, and most importantly, I think mentors love to know that you're someone who's actually going to go out there and return the favour and help other people as well. So the next step with this is actually acknowledging and celebrating success. So if someone's taken you on a journey and helped you find out, maybe they've bought you a book on a programming language or given you some useful links, if you write and have Hello World show up on your screen, they're still going to smile when they hear about that. Let them know. If I've automated something instead of doing it manually based on the advice that someone told me a few months ago, I've let them know and they've loved hearing about it because that's what we like to do in technology, right? The next thing is celebrating when you advance at your job and expressing it and saying thank you and celebrating with these people. And sometimes it's just about being more confident, having technical conversations. There's people in my life that I can have completely different conversations with than I could even 6-12 months ago, and love it. The last thing is celebrating success. For me, it's giving a talk at a developer conference. It's not something I thought I'd be doing at this point. I'm so happy, and I'm definitely celebrating that with my mentors. What I wanted you to take away from this is really most people out there are willing to help and just engage with them. Be friendly and make it easy for them to be able to do it. If you're engaging with someone in IT, generally speaking, they can't say no to a cup of coffee. Invite them out and see what you can find out just over that informal chat. And in general, things are just easier if you ask for help. I do want to call out and say thank you to everyone that's really helped me on my journey to date. look, obviously everyone involved in SheCodes Australia and the amazing support I've received from DDDPerth in preparing the conference. I want to call out everyone I've worked with in the past 2 years, and going forward, the team that I've just joined, but calling out and saying thank you. The people that I've chatted with informally in my apartment building, at parties, everything that I've come across and have given me a little bit of advice along my way. And again, it is just a big thank you for the friends and family that have helped me, support me over this journey. And I wish I could just credit you all for the amazing advice, but there's been so much that I can't keep track of it all.